What's the saying? Oh, well, howdy, stranger. Old Jack at your service, though the only service I've got is flapping my gums and telling how things used to be. Who am I, you ask? Well, maybe I was a gunslinger. Maybe I was the one stacking the deck. Or maybe I was just pouring whiskey for the fellas doing the dirty work. But that ain't why you're here, is it? Nah, you're here to hear a story. So lean in. Rebecca Harper's life as a rancher's daughter was once peaceful and structured on her family's spreads outside Red Hollow. Her father, Samuel Harper, was known for his upright morals in a town ruled by men like Declan Wade, a greedy business magnate and outlaw sympathizer who secretly controls much of the region. When Samuel refused Wade's offer to sell the ranch and join their partnership, trouble brewed like a storm in the distance. The story begins one fateful night when Becky, carrying water from the well, notices the glow of flames in the horizon. The Harper family ranch, her entire world, is engulfed in fire. Screams echo in the air as horses stampede wildly from their stables. By the shoddy sight of figures in the shadows, men wearing bandanas and firing pistols, it's clear this isn't an accident. Becky returns to the house, desperate to find her father, only to discover Wade's men have left more than just fire behind. Becky Harper freezes in place as she watches the world she knew demolished. Fire dances like demons over the ranch her father spent 20 years building. She spots Declan Wade's trademark burnt cane, flung carelessly onto the scorched earth next to her fallen father. Her hands tremble, curling into fists against the moist soil. Declan Wade, she whispers through clenched teeth. Already, the embers ignite one greater fire deep in Becky vengeance. Her father's final words drift through her head from earlier that day. Red Hollow isn't safe anymore, Becky. But you're too strong to fear men like him. Don't run from him until it's a fight worth winning. Her hands shake as she pulls her father's revolver from the smoking remnants of his desk, fully loaded but heavier than it looks. Becky stands on the precipice of transformation. Will she leave her father's lands in search of help? Or will righteous fury drive her to fight even without allies? Her morality is intact, but Declan Wade's schemes force her to question. When sacrifice becomes inevitable, is justice worth bloodshed? She mounts her father's surviving horse and heads toward Red Hollow, a town thick with enemies and strangers to trust, to find answers behind the attack. The dusty streets of Red Hollow stretched in both directions, flanked by crooked wooden structures that leaned as if the wind alone kept them standing. Becky's horse moved uneasily, sensing her tension as she rode through the town. Every window felt like a set of eyes on her. Men loitered outside the saloon, their whiskey-stained laughter cutting through the heavy air, while shopkeepers swept their porches without looking up. Red Hollow had the sour stench of a place where law was only a suggestion, ruled less by the sheriff and more by who held the fastest hand on a pistol. Becky knew Declan Wade lived somewhere in the shadows of this place, but she had no map to lead her to him. All she had was the anger swelling in her chest and the weight of her father's revolver in her saddlebag. She stopped her horse outside a two-story building with a wooden sign swinging above the door. Hollow Rest Boarding House. It was a run-down inn, more peeling paint than structure, but her guts told her to start small and stay unseen. Fewer questions would be asked there. An older woman greeted Becky at the front desk, her face sharp with years of gossip and worry. The woman squinted at her, appraising her plain clothes and the streak of ash trailing down her cheek from the fire. Traveling alone, especially for a young woman, wasn't common, unless you were running from something. "How long do you plan to stay?" the woman asked, her voice wary but not unkind. "Just the night." Becky lied. "I'm passing through." The woman slid a tarnished brass key across the counter, eyes still fixed on Becky, as if trying to gauge her value, whether as a customer or as a target for thieves. Becky thanked her and carried her small bag upstairs. The room had a bed that creaked without anyone lying on it, a window clouded with grime, and a smell like stale tobacco. She placed her saddlebag on the tiny desk, pausing to take out her father's revolver and heft its weight in her palm. This wasn't a weapon for a rancher's daughter. It was for someone else entirely, someone she wasn't yet sure how to be. Night had fallen by the time she felt ready to step outside. Becky needed information, and the town saloon was an obvious source. She pulled her hat low over her face and walked briskly, boots striking hard against the dirt road. Inside, the air reeked of regret, cheap whiskey, spilled beer, and the unwashed bodies of men who had run out of better places to be. The piano player hammered out a tune that was barely audible over the raucous laughter and clinking glasses. Becky's eyes scanned the room cautiously. These were the kind of men who'd set fire to a ranch for half a bottle of gin and a bad idea. As she stepped to the bar, careful to keep herself unnoticed for now, she overheard snippets of conversation that turned her anxiety into icy dread. That Harper ranch went up just like Wade said it would. A gruff voice muttered between drags on a cheroot. Didn't even put up a fight. What a waste. Becky's stomach twisted, but she forced her face to stay neutral as she ordered a watered-down drink. The barkeep, an older man with more patience than teeth, set the cup down and leaned in. "You new here, miss? Red Hollow's not a place for wanderers, if you take my meaning." Becky lifted her eyes just enough to meet his. "I'm looking for someone," she said quietly. "A man who calls the shots around here, runs things from the shadows." The barkeep froze for half a second, his hand wiping the counter before continuing, as if her question had been meaningless. "If you're wise, you leave town come morning. Some shadows bite worse than daylight can burn." But Becky didn't leave. She stepped into a corner of the room, replaying his words as she watched the saloon more carefully. That's when she noticed him, a lean, brooding man with dark eyes and a scar tracing down his cheek. He didn't blend in like the rest, though he sat alone nursing a bottle as if it held more answers than people did. Something about him whispered he didn't belong here either, but for different reasons. Before Becky could decide if approaching was wise, the figure stiffened, tilting his head slightly as though he could sense her gaze. He stood and moved toward her in a way that was both deliberate and cautious. "You've got eyes that don't belong in this town," he said, his voice low but firm. Becky stiffened, thinking of the revolver wrapped tightly in her saddlebag, but the man surprised her. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, seemingly amused. "What's a girl like you doing in Declan Wade's shadow?" She didn't permit herself to bristle at his words, since she'd come here for answers. "What do you know about Wade?" she asked, matching his tone with quiet determination. The man considered her for a long moment before chuckling softly. "That depends. Are you here to be useful, or to die trying?" He held out a hand. "Name's Elias Kane. You don't survive in Red Hollow unless you play the game, and people here know better than to tangle with Wade unless they've got a plan." Becky clasped his hand cautiously, relieved by the strange kindness in his grip even as his words warned her. She wasn't sure if Elias Kane was angling to cheat her or to help, but every instinct in her screamed that her plan couldn't unfold alone. Elias simply smirked as her hesitation lingered. "You've got fire in your eyes, girl," he said. "Let's hope it doesn't burn you alive before we turn it into something useful." For now, it seemed the gears were moving. Whether Elias Kane was trustworthy would be determined soon enough, but Becky wasn't willing to wait idly. Her confrontation with Declan Wade, however dangerous, had just acquired its first pawn. Becky sat across from Elias Kane in the darkest corner of the saloon, her fingers wrapped loosely around the cup of watered whiskey she hadn't touched. The piano had quieted, and the night outside seemed heavier somehow, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Elias leaned back in his chair, boots planted firmly on the floor, while his eyes hovered on her as if he were sizing up a broken horse. Becky could tell he didn't offer alliances easily, and certainly not to strangers. "So tell me," Elias said finally, his drawl slow and deliberate, "why does a ranch girl have that look in her eye? That kind of crazy heat that usually gets people killed before they even pull their guns." He pointed at her casually, but his observation cut too deep to feel idle. Becky's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the rough wood of the table to keep her voice from shaking. "Declan Wade destroyed my family," she replied, her words sharp like broken glass. "He torched my father's ranch, killed him, and left me to deal with the ashes. I came here to find Wade and end him." Elias tilted his bottle, letting the whiskey swirl lazily inside, as though her words hadn't struck home. His eyes strayed to the saloon, scanning the other patrons, before swinging back to her. "You think it's that simple? Walk into his fortified den with a gun and a grudge, and you'll be dead before the echo of your shot leaves the room." "I don't have any other choice," Becky snapped. Her voice caught the attention of a few men nearby, and she lowered it quickly. "I didn't come here for your advice on whether it's possible. I came for help." Elias raised an eyebrow, a reluctant smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Help, huh? What kind of help did you have in mind? Because last I checked, Declan Wade owns this town, people, law, and God himself, if you listen to some folks. You're an over-your-head ranch girl, even with a gun." Despite the sharpness of his words, Becky saw something in Elias's expression, a flicker of recognition, as though he too had looked Wade in the eye once and lived to regret it. Her instincts told her Elias wasn't as indifferent as he pretended to be, and that kernel of truth pulled her forward. "I don't expect miracles," Becky said, leaning across the table. "I just need someone who knows this town, someone who knows Wade's weaknesses. I came here for answers. Maybe you're willing to help me get them." Elias studied her again, his scar catching the lantern light and shading his face like fractured glass. He didn't reply for a long moment, merely setting his bottle down and crossing his arms. "I'm curious about you," he said eventually, his voice dipping lower. "Girls like you don't survive here unless they learn quickly, or burn out even faster. I don't know whether I should call you fearless or foolish, but there's something about you. Declan Wade's weakness isn't his business, ranch girl. It's his ego. And anyone who aims to exploit it better have something Wade wants more than blood." Becky swallowed hard, the weight of her father's revolver in her saddlebag suddenly growing heavier. What does Wade want then? As Elias opened his mouth to respond, both of their heads snapped toward the saloon doors, which groaned open with deliberate slowness. The room fell nearly silent as two men wearing Wade's colors, a muddy red stitched into their leather vests, stepped into the light. Their eyes skimmed the crowd with a predatory gleam that froze Becky to the chair. One of them, barrel-chested with hands that seemed too big for his holstered guns, stepped closer to the bar. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice like crushed stone, "Declan Wade's looking for someone who rode into town earlier today. She's got long hair and the look of trouble about her. Any of you seen her?" Becky felt her stomach drop, her pulse pounding in her ears like a war drum as the man's gaze swept dangerously close to her corner. Elias, without looking at her, shifted his feet slightly and leaned into what seemed like casual indifference. "Haven't seen anyone like that," Elias called out, his drawl dripping with laziness and almost daring the man to doubt him. Becky's blood froze, but Elias tilted his head slightly toward her bag at his feet, a silent command. Her hand instinctively reached for it, brushing over her revolver's grip, but the men didn't linger long. The barrel-chested one snorted and turned toward the bar, muttering something about the town's cowardice and how Wade always got what he wanted. The moment the saloon door slammed shut behind them, Becky released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Still, Elias didn't look at her, his voice calm and full of quiet venom. "That's Wade for you. He picks apart people who don't stand up to him, folks who can't or won't resist." Then his eyes snapped to hers. "You think you're ready to fight a man like him? Not just with a gun, but with your mind and every last bit of grit you've got." "I don't have a choice," Becky said, her voice trembling but firm. Elias leaned forward, closer than he'd been all night, as though daring her to flinch. "No, ranch girl, you have 1,000 choices. It's what makes the fight worth winning. But here's your first. If you want me to help, you follow my lead. You don't act until I say you can act. That's how I've stayed alive this long, and you're going to need to adopt the same rules unless dying is part of your plan." Becky didn't flinch. "Fine," she replied, gripping the edge of the table. "We follow your lead. So what's step one?" Elias smirked faintly, his chair scraping as he stood without answering her question. Instead, he tossed a coin onto the bar as payment for his drink and turned sharply toward the door. "Step one," he muttered under his breath, "is getting us both out of this place before the next of Wade's dogs come sniffing around. Follow me, ranch girl, and let's see if you've got the spine to handle this game." Becky grabbed her bag, her pulse still thrumming as she followed Elias into the shadows of the night. He didn't tell her where he was leading her, but her instinct screamed that abandoning him would mean running circles in this town forever. Behind her, the lights of the saloon dimmed, and the soft howl of the wind grew louder. Somewhere on the horizon, Declan Wade waited. Becky may have gained an ally, but her war was just beginning. The night air was sharp and cold as Becky followed Elias down Red Hollow's cracked and winding streets. The wooden planks of the boardwalk creaked beneath their boots, but the silence between them was heavier than the distant howl of coyotes. Becky's grip tightened on the saddlebag slung over her shoulder, her mind racing with questions that Elias had yet to answer. Who was he? Why did he seem to carry Declan Wade's name like a wound? And most importantly, why had he decided to help her? Elias led her away from the saloon's noisy glow, turning sharply down a narrow alley that twisted into the derelict edge of town. Shadows slithered along the walls of abandoned buildings, thick with graffiti-like scratches from forgotten times. They stopped in front of a weathered barn just outside the last rows of homes, a structure so warped and uninviting that Becky instinctively held back before Elias motioned her forward. "In here," he said quietly, pushing the door open with a groan that echoed too loud against the night. Becky hesitated, but Elias didn't seem concerned. He ducked low under the crooked doorframe and disappeared inside, forcing herself to trust that the man who had kept her hidden mere moments ago wouldn't suddenly turn on her. She followed, her eyes adjusted slowly to the dark interior, catching sight of a lantern in Elias's hand. He lit it with the strike of a match, flooding the space with a dim, flickering glow. The place looked like an old stable, converted for squatters. There was no hay, but discarded blankets and crates sat in the far corner, and a battered table had been dragged into the middle of the barn. A large map of Red Hollow and the surrounding frontier plains was splayed across it, weighed down by smashed-in cans and faded knives. The only clean thing in the room was a dark pistol gleaming on the tabletop, its polished finish catching the light as if it were proud of its lethalness. "You live here?" Becky asked, her voice low but tinged with something between pity and confusion. Elias gave her a quick glance, his scarred face unreadable. Nobody watches barns they think are empty. It's the kind of place nobody notices, which is exactly what makes it useful. Becky nodded, scanning the room cautiously. Although it felt safe enough in some ways, the faint scent of mildew mingled with the rusty tang of old blood reminded her that this place had been used for things far less innocent than strategizing. Elias motioned her toward the table. "If you're planning to take down Declan Wade, you'll need more than fire in your gut and a loaded revolver. Wade's got layers, man-land networks. You attack the surface, and you'll get crushed before you even see him coming. But here," he tapped the map, his fingers skimming over the scrawled circles and notations that marked roads, watch points, and key buildings throughout Red Hollow and beyond. One of them bore Wade's name underlined 3 times, written in shaky penmanship. Nearby marks pinpointed supply routes, allies, and outposts that Becky recognized, spots her father had spoken about long before their ranch burned. Wade's strength isn't just his numbers. He controls the flow of everything in this region: guns, cattle, drink, whatever keeps these worms alive. You cut off the head of his operations too soon, and the ripples won't matter. His machine keeps rolling. He leaned closer, his voice lowering with a sharp edge of caution. "You don't want a war on the first shot, ranch girl. You chip away until he bleeds dry." Becky stared at the map, her stomach churning with a mix of anger and unease. "Why are you telling me this? You seem eager to play teacher, but what's Wade to you?" For a moment, Elias stilled, like her question had called up something buried and unwanted. He looked at her, his jaw tightening before he finally spoke. Wade doesn't live in shadows because he likes the dark. He creates them. And some of us, he gestured vaguely to himself, we've been swallowed by them before. He didn't elaborate further, and Becky didn't push. There was a stiffness to his posture, a warning that pressing too hard could fracture whatever tenuous trust they'd built. Instead, she forced herself to focus, even as her hands itched to reach for the revolver still tucked safely in her bag. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her voice firm. "I didn't come this far to stall." Elias leaned on the table, hands flattening the edges of the map as if to steady something far larger than paper. "We start small. Wade's men are everywhere. Saloon drinkers, merchants, even the sheriff. But the linchpins, the ones he can't run his empire without, are limited. And I know of one who'll crack for the right price." "Who?" Becky prompted, her pulse quickening. "Eugene Prentice," Elias said, his lip twitching disdainfully. "An accountant in Wade's operations. Handles the money, arranges deals, but he's soft. Hated by even Wade's closest men because he doesn't play outlaw like the rest of them. He'll talk if he thinks keeping quiet dents his bank ledger faster than spilling secrets." "And where do we find him?" Becky asked. Elias's smirk resurfaced. "If I'm right, and I usually am, Prentice is upstairs at the saloon right now. Keeps a room there most nights to avoid going out to Wade's main ranch unless he's forced." He straightened, crossing his arms as he added, "But don't mistake him for harmless. The man's a rat. You corner him wrong, he'll squeal for mercy, and you'll have Wade himself here faster than you can blink." Becky's stomach knotted at the thought. "So how do we corner him without running headfirst into Wade?" "You let me talk," Elias replied simply. "It's been a while since I've made Prentice's acquaintance, but my name still carries weight in certain circles. Of course, there's also the chance he'll recognize you first. If any of Wade's men tipped him off about your face, you're bound to put him on edge." For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Becky felt the magnitude of the risk she was taking fully settle on her shoulders. She was chasing a ghost of justice in a town where no one lived clean and no one stayed safe. Yet her father's voice seemed to whisper over the cold wind outside, keeping her resolve solid. "When do we move?" Becky asked, her voice stubborn but steel-touched. Elias paused long enough to scrutinize her one final time before pulling his pistol from the table, sliding it into its holster in one fluid motion. Now, his answer chilled her bones and strengthened her at the same time. As he opened the barn door again, the howling wind greeted them like a conspirator in their mission. Rebecca Harper brushed off her doubts, steadied her breath, and slipped into the night beside Elias. Somewhere above the saloon, Eugene Prentice was living comfortably off Wade's blood money. He'd never see her coming. The saloon loomed ahead like a beast waiting to swallow them whole. Its second-floor windows cast fractured lantern light onto the street below, dancing across the dirt road like ghostly fingers. Becky kept her hat low, clutching her saddlebag tightly to her side, while Elias walked ahead with the ease of a man who'd spent more time in places like this than under open skies. "Follow me. Don't speak unless I say you can," Elias muttered under his breath, without glancing back. The inside of the saloon was quieter than before, though the smell of whiskey and sweat still lingered in the air. Most of the men had stumbled home or passed out on the floorboards, leaving a few diehards murmuring over their cards or flexing greedy hands over every last coin in their dwindling piles. Becky glanced around nervously, hoping none of Wade's men were still here to recognize her face. Elias moved quickly. He stepped behind the bar, exchanged a quick word with the barkeep, a sharp nod and flick of the barkeep's thumb toward the staircase, and then motioned for Becky to follow. Together, they wove through the main room of the saloon with little notice. Becky's knuckles brushed the grip of her father's revolver through the saddlebag as they reached the base of the stairs. Elias turned back, his face serious, his voice hardly louder than a whisper. "Keep your hand on that gun, but don't use it unless you're aiming to kill. Prentice might fold with words alone, but if he doesn't, You need to be ready for everything to crack open fast." Becky nodded. Her heart pounded harder with each step up the creaking staircase, the whispering of the saloon below vanishing into the heavy silence above. The hallway at the top was dark, doors lining each side, but Elias seemed to know exactly where to go. He stopped in front of the third door on the left, pressing his ear against it before signaling Becky to stay behind him. With a sharp knock, Elias stepped back and waited. Footsteps shuffled within, muffled curses following soon after, before the door cracked open a few inches. A pale, gaunt face with watery blue eyes and a receding hairline peeked out suspiciously. "Eugene Prentice." "What the hell?" the man hissed, his voice breaking off when he recognized Elias. His face flashed with confusion and fear, as though he'd just seen a ghost. "Kane, you're supposed to be dead," Elias cut in smoothly, his voice laced with dry amusement. "Not yet, Eugene. Tell your boss he'll need to try harder next time. But right now we need to talk." I don't have time," Prentice stammered, but Elias shoved forward before the man could finish the thought, forcing the door wide open. Prentice stumbled back, sputtering as Elias entered the room as if it were his own. Becky followed quickly, shutting the door behind her and pressing her back to it as her eyes scanned the scene. The room was as shabby as the rest of the saloon. An unmade cot in the corner, a rickety desk littered with half-empty bottles and papers, and a single window left cracked open to let the night air creep in. "Do you know who's downstairs right now?" Prentice demanded, his voice rising in nervous anger. "Wade's men, if they find you here." "They won't," Elias interrupted, his tone turning cold. "Because if they do, you're going to be the one with the bigger problem." Prentice blinked rapidly, sweat forming on his brow. What do you want, Kane? Why are you here?" Elias crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk, his body language calm but exuding a menace that made Becky's stomach turn. "I want you to tell me what Wade's planning. And don't try to lie to me. I've got a good nose for rats, Eugene, and I know your kind scurry away the second you think it's safe." Prentice visibly swallowed, his hands twitching at his sides. I don't know anything. I just handle the money, nothing more. Wade doesn't tell me about his operations." Elias raised a single brow and leaned forward, his voice dropping to an almost casual whisper. "See, here's the thing. I don't believe you. You've been handling Wade's purse strings long enough to know where the bodies are buried, figuratively and literally. You're not a nobody, Eugene, and Wade doesn't keep dead weight around. So let's try this again." Prentice opened his mouth to protest again, but Elias was quicker. In one smooth motion, he reached into his coat, pulled out a knife, and embedded it into the wood of the desk, just inches from Prentice's hand. Becky flinched at the sound of the blade sinking into wood, but Elias remained steady. "Stop wasting my time," Elias hissed. "Do you want to survive tonight? Or do you want me to introduce you to Wade's favorite kind of justice?" Becky watched silently, her eyes darting between the two men. She knew she couldn't let this escalate too far. Violence hadn't been her plan. She stepped forward, her voice breaking the tension like an unexpected gust of wind. "Tell us what Wade's doing," she said firmly, though her pulse hammered in her chest. "Why was my family's ranch burned? Why did Wade send his men to kill my father?" Prentice's head snapped to her, confusion mingling with fear. "Your father? Wait!" His pale blue eyes narrowed, recognition dawning slowly. "Rebecca Harper. My God, you were supposed to..." "Supposed to what?" Becky demanded. Her fingers hovered near the revolver in her bag. Prentice stumbled back, bumping into the cot with wide eyes. I didn't know. Wade said it was just business. A message to anyone who refused to cooperate. But your father... He wasn't like the others. He knew things. Things Wade didn't want anyone else finding out." "Like what?" Elias cut in sharply. Prentice hesitated, his lips trembling as if the words themselves might sign his death warrant. Finally, with a shuddering breath, he whispered, "Your father knew about Canyon Hollow." Elias froze. For the first time since Becky had met him, His calm, smug demeanor cracked. "What's Canyon Hollow?" Becky asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Prentice shook his head quickly, his fear bubbling over into full-blown panic. I can't say. If Wade finds out I told you." "If Wade finds out?" Elias snarled, grabbing the man by the collar and pulling him inches from his face. "You'll be dead either way. But you tell me what Canyon Hollow is, and maybe I'll make sure you live to see the sun tomorrow." Prentice whimpered, shrinking in Elias's grip. Finally, he choked out the words that sent a chill down Becky's spine. "It's not a place. It's people. Wade's got them hidden in an old mine just west of town. Prisoners, workers, slaves, dozens of them. The Harper Ranch wasn't about your father. It was about access. Your land sat right over the only water source near the mine." Becky's blood ran cold. Her father hadn't just died for refusing Wade. He had died because Wade's greed ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Elias released Prentice with a forceful shove, sending the man sprawling onto the cot. His face darkened with something Becky hadn't seen before: rage. "This changes everything," Elias murmured. Becky nodded, her fingers gripping her saddlebag as her fury hardened into newfound resolve. "Then we bring it all crashing down." The wind howled like a living thing as Becky tightened the reins of her horse, her breath visible in the icy air of dawn. Elias sat astride his own mount, staring grimly ahead toward the jagged silhouette of the canyon on the horizon. Canyon Hollow. The name felt as heavy as the revolver at her hip. It wasn't just a place, but the heart of Declan Wade's empire, where greed and cruelty had been carved into the rocks like scars. Prentice's confession had revealed more than Becky had been prepared for. Her family's land wasn't just collateral damage in Wade's plans. It had been key to sustaining his hidden operations. Water for the enslaved workers at the mine. Her father's stand against selling the Harper Ranch had cost him his life, and now Becky intended to ensure that Wade's blood-soaked legacy ended here. They had left Red Hollow before the sun rose, riding hard and fast to stay ahead of Wade's men, who would no doubt piece together their movements soon. Prentice wasn't likely to last long once Wade found him cowering in the saloon, but his words had been enough. "The mine's on the far side of the canyon," he'd whimpered. "It's guarded, but most of the men come and go with freight wagons, cargo in, cargo out. That's where you'll find him. That's where Wade controls everything." Elias had turned to Becky then, his eyes shadowed but unwavering. "If we do this, there's no turning back. Wade won't just fight. You'll have a price on your head till your last breath. Are you ready for that?" Becky hadn't flinched. "I've had a price on my head since the night my father died." Now, as the canyon rose closer with every hoofbeat, Elias broke the silence. "We can't just storm and guns blazing. Wade has men stationed everywhere, and if we lose the element of surprise, we won't make it past the first century." Becky nodded, clutching the handle of her father's revolver. "We need a way to draw them out, something that splits their attention." Elias looked at her thoughtfully, then gestured to the rocky ridge that encircled the canyon. "There's an old mine shaft up there," he said. "Collapsed years ago, but it runs above the main entrance to Wade's camp. If I can get inside and set off some charges, it'll make enough noise to draw his men out. Maybe give you a window to confront Wade directly." Becky's pulse quickened. She didn't like the idea of splitting up, but Elias's plan made sense. If they could scatter Wade's defenses, she might have a chance to corner him and end this once and for all. "Are you sure you can handle that alone?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Elias turned to her with a faint smirk, though it didn't fully reach his eyes. "Been handling worse situations alone for years, ranch girl. Don't worry about me. Just make sure you finish what you came here for." They dismounted near the base of the ridge, tethering their horses in the concealment of thick scrub. Elias handed her a small satchel of supplies, water, extra rounds, and a crude sketch of the canyon layout. "The main shack just past the mine mouth is where Wade likes to hold court," he explained quickly. "He won't run from you. He'll fight, but he'll fight dirty." Becky's jaw tightened as she nodded. "Let him try." Without another word, Elias climbed the ridge, his silhouette disappearing into the dawn haze. Becky watched him for a moment, a knot of worry twisting in her chest. Then she turned toward the canyon's entrance and began to make her way down the narrow path. The drive to reach Wade burned through her like a branding iron. Every step closer to the mine brought memories of her father, his calloused hand steady as he worked the ranch, his voice calm as he taught her to shoot for the first time, his laughter like a rare treasure on quiet evenings. That man had died because he stood for something Wade couldn't buy or break. Becky wasn't just fighting for vengeance. She was fighting to honor the man who had raised her, the principles he had lived and died for. The canyon expanded around her, revealing the sprawling chaos of Wade's operation. Shadows of men bustled between makeshift buildings. Wagons loaded high with goods creaked over wooden tracks, and the massive hole of the mine gaped open like the maw of a monster. Above it all loomed the largest structure, a two-story shack propped up against the canyon wall, its windows glowing faintly in the pale light. Becky's fists clenched. That had to be where Wade was, keeping low and quiet. She weaved between the boulders and scrub that littered the mine's outskirts. She could hear the murmur of low voices and sporadic laughter, the clink of tools echoing in the distance. Wade's men were everywhere, and her every step felt like balancing on the edge of a blade. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shattered the air. The ground beneath her feet trembled as dust and debris rained down from the ridge. Becky's heart leapt into her throat. Elias's charges. The mine shaft above had collapsed spectacularly, sending clouds of smoke and noise roaring over the canyon. Shouts erupted as Wade's men scrambled to respond, many of them abandoning their posts to investigate the chaos. This was her chance. With her revolver drawn, Becky sprinted toward the wooden shack, keeping to the shadows as much as she could. Her lungs burned, her pulse thundered in her ears, but adrenaline drowned out everything else. She reached the door and pressed herself against the wall, listening to the low voices inside. "What the hell is going on out there?" one man growled. "Doesn't matter," came Wade's voice, smooth and arrogant. "Get the riders ready. Whoever's behind this is going to regret stirring the beast." Becky's breath hitched in her throat. Her hand gripped the revolver, so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was it. Kicking the door open with a force that sent it crashing against the wall, Becky stormed inside. Declan Wade spun around, startled, though his surprise quickly melted into a cold smirk as he recognized her. "Well, well," he drawled. "The little Harper girl. I thought you'd burned with that pathetic ranch." Becky didn't lower her weapon. "You're going to pay for what you did. To my father. To those men out there. All of it ends now." Wade chuckled darkly, his hand twitching toward his holstered pistol. "Oh, sweetheart, that's cute. But revenge? It doesn't look good on amateurs like you. You think you can just come into my canyon, into my house, and threaten me?" He moved faster than she anticipated, drawing his gun in one smooth motion. But Becky's training, her rage, and the will of everything her father had taught her snapped into place. She fired first. The shot echoed like thunder, slamming into Wade's hand before his weapon could fully rise. He shouted in pain, his pistol clattering to the ground. Blood pooled over his knuckles as he stumbled back, clutching his injured hand. "You've got fight in you," Wade spat, his voice stained with venom. "I'll give you that. But this doesn't end here, Harper. Men like me don't die. They just come back bigger." Becky stepped forward, her revolver leveled between his eyes. "Not this time," she said quietly. "Not for you." Her second shot rang out, and Wade collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. Becky stood frozen, the revolver still aimed at where Wade had fallen, her body trembling under the weight of everything she had just done. Slowly, she lowered the weapon. Outside, the world continued to burn. Wade's empire wouldn't crumble in a single day, but his reign of tyranny had ended. Becky Harper had made sure of that. In the distance, she saw Elias waiting at the ridge, his figure still and patient. And for the first time in days, weeks, perhaps months, she allowed herself to breathe. "See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you."